Hey, welcome to northern Minnesota. I just picked up a used snowmobile for ice fishing this winter for a friend. And I want to show you kind of some of the things that I noticed about this snowmobile that'll hopefully help people when they're shopping for a used snowmobile of any brand, any vintage. Stay tuned. The front suspension, this is what they call a trailing link front suspension. And so you've got this really long link. And one of the things, if there's front end damage, a lot of times this bolt or where it attaches will be damaged. So you can look here and see that this bolt is straight. So that's a good sign. Then as you follow this along, there's what they call radius rods here. Now, the radius rods, you can see that there's one set of radius rods that stick down below the belly pan. And what can happen is if you hit a rock or something, this is what gets hit. So what you want to look at is whether they're straight. And on this snowmobile, they are straight. So that looks really good. Another thing that we want to look at with the front suspension is the skis. Now in this case, these are steel skis. Now I don't like steel skis except for one thing. When you look at the skis, look at how straight these edges are, and especially the outside of the ski. These are really straight. Now this has a plastic on the bottom, which is probably why these are so straight. These skis look like they're brand new. If you hit a rock or something, these will get all banged up. And of course, because they're steel, they don't go back. You know, where plastic, you really can't tell if you hit a rock or something, but with these steel ones, you definitely can tell. These things get banged up, they get abused, and so you can see if there's damage, but there is no damage here. So this is a really good sign. Down here on the rear suspension, what you want to see is you want to check to make sure that all the wheels seem to be intact. You're going to want to try to check the bearings, but it's really not possible to do that with the proper track tension. You want to make sure that everything looks okay here, that all the wheels are not wobbling around, and this looks really good. Back here, same thing. You want to make sure that the wheels look okay. One thing you want to notice is that, okay, so it's kind of hard to see, but there's a black piece of plastic here. That is the Hyfax. So this is what the track ride's on, and you can see that it's about maybe 3/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 inch thick. And what you want to see here is about 1/2 inch or maybe even a little bit more. So these are pretty much wore out and will need to be replaced. The problem with Hyfax is that it wears differently. So you can maybe you look back here and you see, oh, there's plenty of thickness. But then as you go along here, you might see, like right up in here, it might wear much more. So you want to look the entire length of the Hyfax to see, because different parts of it will wear differently. One thing I noticed here are these gouges. You see these? Okay, so the problem is that this snowmobile has studs, okay? Those studs have come up through the tunnel. This is a bad sign. This makes me a little nervous. So what we want to see underneath here is kind of what the tunnel looks like. Now, thank goodness there are tunnel protectors. This one has got a little bit of a broken off here. You can see the other one is a little longer. This one is broken off. But these tunnel protectors save the tunnel. This piece back here, this is kind of a sacrificial ornamental thing that's just meant to protect you from getting a lot of snow dust. So it's not a big deal. But this is what you want to see, is you do not want to see any damage to the underside of the snowmobile. This would be a bad sign. The track is in pretty good condition. This track is over 30 years old. It is a Polaris track. I can see that right here. So it might be a replacement track. If it is, it's from Polaris. So it's a good track, but it's not some rinky-dink track that came off of some salvage yard or whatever. It looks like it's in pretty good shape, but it's an old track, and so tracks are kind of wear item. I mean, they do eventually wear out. As I look along here, I don't see any tear outs from the studs. It's really hard to see in here anyway, but because of the nature of this snowmobile, I would be really surprised. Any of these that are missing, if there's a hole in the track, what I say by tear out, meaning that basically these things have been torn off the track, and there'll be a big gouge. It won't just be a hole here, there'll be a big gouge. And that is usually a bad sign that the snowmobile has been used and abused quite a bit. And in this case, I don't see any of that. I don't see any rips or tears or anything on the track itself. Really good sign. This might seem minor, but you see here's the fuel cap, and it does have some cracks in it. But what happens to these is this little plastic thing cracks and then comes off. And when that happens, you'll get snow and water inside of the gas tank. That is a bad sign. So in this case, it does not have that. And there are a few little cracks in the vinyl. It's vinyl. That's kind of what happens to it. So that's not a deal breaker by any means. This is the kind of thing that happens, and there are ways to repair that. But like I said, you want to watch the fuel tank and make sure that this isn't open to the elements, because you don't want water in there. On the instrument panel, the big thing here is how many miles there are. Now, the number of miles tells you two things. First of all, it tells you how many miles are on the chassis and potentially the engine. And when you get into this 6,000 mile range, that's pretty high. You got to figure that really any bearings in the suspension or in the drivetrain, any bearings, they're going to need to be replaced. 6,000 miles on any of those bearings is a long time. But the other thing that this tells you is that this gauge probably works. Now, that's the one thing that you want to find out, and I'll explain to you in a minute why. But high mileage doesn't necessarily mean stay away from the snowmobile. So don't use that as a warning sign. Use that to tell you more about what kind of snowmobile it is. All right, here we are under the hood, and you can see there's a little bit of this heat shield thing is kind of loose, not a big deal. There's some insulation here, and none of it looks like, one of the things that'll happen is if mice get in here, they'll start chewing this up, and you'll see little mice things all over the place. I don't see any of that here. What I see is normal wear and tear. This stuff really doesn't last very long. So, I'm not surprised that there's some damage. I don't see any sign that there were mice in here. Now let's take a look at this engine. This is a fan-cooled engine, and we've got two carburetors. That's, again, everything looks fine here. There's a little bit of rust showing, not a big deal. Well, you don't want to see an excessive amount of rust. What the rust tells you is that this snowmobile has been run around a lot, like a trailered without a cover, and it's gotten a lot of road salt. So if you see a lot of corrosion on the engine, that's usually a sign that it's seen a lot of road salt, and that's really hard on engines. So, those are the things you want to be concerned about. Now, this battery is a little small for the battery tray. Obviously, it's not the right size but it does work. One thing I noticed here is that there should be a foam piece over the intake, and that's gone. That's not here anymore. So that's something to watch for. I do like the fact that there's a spare belt here. That's a good sign that somebody actually took the time to keep a spare belt on here. Let's just look over here just a little bit more. And one of the things that I noticed right away with this snowmobile, and something that's going to be addressed. Now, you see, look at how dirty the starter motor is. There's all this gunk on the starter motor. Where is that coming from? Where's all this oil coming from? It's coming from here someplace. So I got it on my hand. Nice. So why is that happening? Well, here's the exhaust where the manifold bolts to the engine, and they're dry. Those are dry. But look at here. Here's a little, looks like it's been welded, and there's a leak there. Now, sometimes, and it doesn't look, I'm not sure on this one, but on some of these, so this is leaking right here. And again, is this a critical issue? Not really. It just gets everything dirty. So you can see how much oil leakage there is around this. This has obviously been repaired. You can see that there's a little piece has been welded here. And maybe there's a kind of a cup and ball kind of joint here. And maybe the cup doesn't fit completely over the ball. A lot of these have seals, little donuts that go around that seal this up. And I can't remember on this one if this has that or not. So I'm gonna have to pull these springs off and take a look. The other thing that might be happening here is these springs might just be worn out. These things stretch over time, and if they don't hold it tight, you know, sometimes it can leak around that. But when we started this up, I noticed that there was quite a bit of blow by. There was quite a bit of smoke coming out of this area, and that's something I'm going to have to look into. I'm going to try to lower you down here because I can't see it. All right, see that? See that right there? That is the drive shaft bearing, and attached to that is the speedometer cable. So inside of this thing is a pin that it's a square pin that goes into the drive shaft. And what can happen is that little pin breaks. If that pin breaks, you don't have a speedometer. But what that tells you is if you don't have a speedometer, and this goes for just about any snowmobile, if you don't have a speedometer, that usually means you've got a bad bearing. So you can't, obviously, I'm standing here, I mean, I can't really see. And what I really want to know is, are the drive shaft bearings okay? And I can't tell that. You know, and it's almost impossible to get down in there. But what I can tell is if I've got a speedometer. If the speedometer works, then I know I've got, at least for now, I've got good bearings. Now, that's why you want to see high mileage, because if you've got like really low mileage, so let's say 1,000 miles, and somebody says, I actually saw one of these online. The guy said, speedometer doesn't work. Ding, 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 red flag right there. Do not worry, do not look at a snowmobile that says the speedometer doesn't work if you're not prepared to fix it immediately, because that usually tells you that the bearing is bad. And in order to get at that bearing, as you can see, I got to take a whole bunch of stuff apart. I got to drop the rear suspension, and I got to pull off the clutches. I got to get down in here. I got to tip the snowmobile on its side. It's a mess to replace that bearing. So unless I want to rip this snowmobile all the way apart, do not buy a snowmobile that has that doesn't have a working speedometer. All right, one of the things I noticed here is that I've got the original toolkit. This thing didn't really come with much for tools. There's a spark plug wrench, there's a little open end wrench here, there's a screwdriver, and that was pretty much it. I've got a set of spark plugs in here, which is just normal to have, carry extra spark plugs around on these old snowmobiles. But then I've also got the original toolkit. So that's pretty cool. That again tells me that this snowmobile has really not been shuttled around very much, as far as, you know, it hasn't been bought and sold many times. I think it's, you know, it looks like it's been really well taken care of. Right, one thing I want to highlight here. So there's a couple things that are concerning to me. One is the exhaust leak down here. There's one more thing though. So I didn't even pay attention to this until I loaded it on the trailer. Check this out. Okay, the brake handle goes all the way to the bars. Now that's pretty bad. If I look down here, here's the brake right in here, and it does not move. There's no movement there. So this, either there's no fluid in here. My guess is there's a problem with the brake line. All right, one other thing that I noticed is that the recoil starter doesn't seem to grab. So down in here, there's some dogs that engage with the flywheel, and when you pull the cord, it pulls it engages the flywheel. Well, that's not happening. It does, and the seller told me that it does. If you pull hard enough and fast enough, it will engage. Well, that tells me it probably just needs to be lubed up or cleaned up or something. So I'm definitely going to pull the recoil off of here and have a look at that. While we're down here, here's a fuel filter. Assume that you're going to need a new fuel filter. Oil filters, there is an oil filter down in here. I've never replaced one, unless, I don't know why you'd want to do that. If the snowmobile has been taken care of, then I wouldn't expect to need to replace the oil filter. There's no oil, there's no dirt that ever gets in there, because it's sealed up pretty good. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. The choke and electric start both work really good on this snowmobile. So again, I don't really have any concerns, and it idles fine. So I don't really have any concerns about the carburetors. I don't think that there's really any adjustments that are needed. It doesn't seem to need a carb cleaning because it seems to run fine. I might do it anyway, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. If it runs okay, I'd kind of leave it alone. Watch for damage. What you want to do is kind of look along the sides here. Now, these can, if you roll the snowmobile over, or a lot of times there's other damage, these things will get crooked. So you can see that this is really straight. If I close the hood, it falls right in there. So there's really no problem with damage to the sides. Also, the front bumper is straight, and the back bumper is also straight. Let me show you. So here's the back bumper down here where my fingers are. Again, straight. So even though there's some damage to the rear tunnel here from the studs, there's no damage to the bumper. This thing has not been really abused at all. So again, a nice clean snowmobile, and should work out really good. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope I see you on the trail.